In Pursuit of Truth, this is your host, Sir Patrick Mack. We are back and we are picking right up where we last left you, purveyors of pursuitude, in my last video from the 26th entitled DRK2LYT. Hence the name part 2. And no, there's no such thing as new music, and there's no such thing as the old music. Nothing's gone away. Nothing's replaced the old stuff. The horns haven't gone away. The dogs haven't gone away. Sometimes I just like to mix up the music, which is my right. Sometimes I like to theme it out because I have OCD. Because I have OCD. If you've not seen my video from the 26th entitled DRK2LYT, I highly suggest that you do. As a matter of fact, I highly suggest that you watch it before watching this video because it is going to be adding on from the previous video. Hence the name part 2. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's do it! Want to take you back to post 3884 from the other day, the last video that we made on the 26th of February. And I do hope that you'll watch the video as opposed to hoping that I will be able to fill you in on all the details in this video. I don't want to rehash too much, but I will try to rememberize you a little bit of some elements here. But if you'll remember, I was actually on this post, and then Q posted some more, and of course we want to continue and get that out, and so we moved on. But there were some other things that I wanted to bring up about this story, and of course I didn't want to sidestep Q's narrative, and I don't really want to do that now. I think Q was pointing out a couple of things. A, there was a Q proof here, and B, that there were indeed some big names coming, and so that's what we're talking about. Now in this post, you can see that Q is taking us back another year from the, actually it says here the 25th of 2019. So this was a year ago on the same day. Now this graphic maker points this out as 2871. It says Q Europe. It might be a little bit different. On Qmap, I believe this post is actually post 2888. But in this post, we have two tweets from Patton Oswalt. Patton Oswalt is an actor. He's a comedian. He's now spends a lot of his time doing voice acting, but he's been around for quite some time. And of course, these are both these tweets. You can read them for yourselves. Poor taste, but I do consider that being a comedian, sometimes comedians push it a little bit. I usually am inclined to be a little bit liberal with that, I guess. But obviously, there was a little bit of a trend with Patton Oswalt. Now, in the context of the timing of this was right around the time that director James Gunn was under fire for pretty much the very same thing, and it was starting to get a little bit sketchy. There were a few different comics that were coming out, and all these older tweets were being pulled out. Keep in mind, these tweets were from Patton, at least, were from 2013. But that was sort of the climate at the time that this post came out. Director James Gunn was under fire, and of course, he's got connections to Disney. I pointed out how Patton Oswalt also had connections to Disney. Patton Oswalt was, of course, married to Michelle McNamara, who wrote the book I'll Be Gone in the Dark. And I pointed out in my last video that Q referenced DRK2LYT, and I thought it was curious that Michelle McNamara's book was called I'll Be Gone in the Dark. She was one of the journalists trying to uncover the Golden State Killer's identity, and this was a big story. And again, we're not going to rehash that whole story, but she passed away in the middle of making this book. As a matter of fact, it was Patton Oswalt and a few other friends that had to help finish this book. Now, once the book was actually published, they found this guy just a couple months later, the actual Golden State Killer. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But it was a curious death of Michelle McNamara. It looked to be a cocktail of different kinds of drugs, and it was ruled as an accidental suicide. Very strange indeed, right? Well, Q had said, big name coming, nobody is safe, DRK2LYT, these people are sick. And of course, I think the media reference, which is why I was saying I didn't want to sidestep Q's narrative, might have been that they were referencing Disney CEO Bob Iger, which of course, who had just recently stepped down. We had a number of people stepping down, right? We had a CEO from MasterCard, Under Armour, Nike, Uber, Salesforce. And I want to talk a little bit more about Salesforce too, but these were some really big names. Q had said, now isn't that interesting? So there was our Q proof, and I couldn't help but think there still felt like there was more to this story in regards to Patton Oswalt. And of course, I pointed out all the different connections with the Golden State Killer, which is what I want to talk a little bit more about today. But like I said, James Gunn, Disney, Bob Iger, Disney. Patton Oswalt has worked with Disney. I wouldn't necessarily say that I associate him with Disney, but he's been in some big Disney movies. I pointed out that he was in Ratatouille, where he played Remy, and I showed you in that previous video that Remy was connected to a bunch of these cryptic dog tweets. And then about a year later, it's about 15 months later, after Melissa McNamara died, Patton Oswalt remarried, and he married Meredith Salinger. And she's an interesting character too. I don't necessarily think there's anything nefarious going on, but she was also a Disney actress. As a matter of fact, she was in the 1985 film The Journey of Natty Gann and 1989 Dream a Little. These were actually really big films back in the day. And again, Disney. Now she left Hollywood for a while, went to Harvard, and she got a degree in psychology. She came back to Hollywood, and she's done some work throughout, very much like Patton Oswalt. These are not necessarily what we would know as A-list actors, but these are people who work regularly in Hollywood and make a really good living. But she also does voice acting, which is how I would assume she met Patton Oswalt. So they married, and oddly enough, caught a little bit of flack for having a little bit of, I don't know if you would call it a honeymoon, but a little trip to Disneyland. Okay, so Q had said big names, and of course back then we were also talking about Harvey Weinstein, who arguably is a very big name. So many Hollywood movies would not have been made if it weren't for Weinstein. If you've not checked out my Weatherman series, you will see where he's wrapped up in some different issues there, but Weinstein, of course, is a very big name. So a year later, Q is referencing this again, and of course, what would be bigger than Weinstein? I'm not really sure. I guess you could argue out of all the bunch, Bob Iger would probably be the biggest one, right, with Disney. Now, Disney's massive, but I'm not so sure that the name Bob Iger is a household name. I don't really know if that's the reference or not, but Disney, of course, is a massive, massive conglomerate, right? And of course, over the months, we've shown Disney's connections with Jeffrey Epstein, having whether it was the tours from the Disney cruises that were going to Little St. James Island, or you could even refer to Ghislaine Maxwell and even her father, Robert Maxwell, through the Daily Mirror, who were constantly doing promos through Disneyland over the years. And of course, we know that Disneyland has a lot of problems with sexual abuse, and not just sexual abuse, but the kind where people tend to like them a little bit young, if you know what I mean. So is this our big name? Well, I suppose it could be. Is if it helps bring down Disney, maybe. But like we stated in the last video, Bob Iger hasn't necessarily left this company. He stepped down as CEO, but he's still got kind of one of these fancy executive assistant roles. Now, I want to take you to this other story and why I think this is also relevant and very curious. This was from the 26th as well. This was another one of our quote-unquote big names. Salesforce co-CEO Keith Block steps down. Salesforce today announced that Keith Block, the company's co-CEO, is stepping down. This leaves company founder Mark Benioff as the sole CEO and chair of the CRM juggernaut. Block's bio has already been wiped from Salesforce leadership page. Okay, so it looks like whether or not he stays on with the company for a while, the very first thing they wanted to do was distance themselves by wiping his bio. Block stepped into the co-CEO role in 2018 after a long career at the company that saw him become vice chairman, president, and director before he took this position. Block spent the early years of his career at Oracle. He left there in 2012 after the release of a number of documents. Check this out. He left there in 2012 after the release of a number of documents in which he criticized then Oracle CEO Mark Hurd, who passed away last year. Yes, now. Let me flash you this from the New York Post from October 2019. This is Mark Hurd from Oracle, dead at 62. Oracle co-chief executive Mark Hurd, who led two Silicon Valley giants even as he weathered a scandal over his relationship with a former reality TV star, has died at 62. Oracle confirmed his death Friday, but gave no cause. Hurd had been on medical leave, which Oracle announced in September. Okay, and they don't say this in the article, but they never really gave a reason or cause for his death. He was on medical leave and then just died. Anyway, I've got highlighted down below at the bottom paragraph, he had resigned from HP, being Hewlett-Packard, following a scandal that rocked the company when Jodie Fisher, a former reality TV star who worked as a greeter at HP events, accused him of trying to badger her into entering a sexual relationship. Yeah, and he ended up trying to pay her off with quite a bit of coin. So this guy was in a scandal. He died. And although he was criticizing Mark Hurd at the time, he ended up stepping into this role at Salesforce after leaving Oracle. So it's a very, very kind of curious thing here. But this is Keith Block from Salesforce. Now, there's a lot of curious things about Salesforce that I'd like to show you. So, IPOT, what is this Salesforce of which you speak? To which I reply, let's find out from their website. Salesforce is a customer relationship management solution that brings companies and customers together. That sounds like a fancy way of saying we sell customer data. It's one integrated CRM platform that gives all your departments, including marketing, sales, commerce, and service, a single shared view of every customer. So we sell all kinds of different data. Well, this is a big thing, folks, and this is bringing in a ton of money, making a lot of folks rich in good ways and bad, of course, but there are some big companies involved. Over 150,000 companies, both big and small, are growing their business with Salesforce. Brunello Cucinelli, BBVA, Unilever, Humu, T-Mobile, and Red. We might need to make a video about them one of these days. So they got this program over here at Salesforce, and it's called Dreamforce. And Dreamforce helps build a better world by making you feel like you're not as good of a person as they are. But I want you to see these numbers. Now, these are actually from a keynote speech that Keith Block was actually giving, which I also felt had some creepy moments. So what you're looking at is actually a screenshot from his presentation. And but what I wanted to show were some of these numbers were really, really staggering. You can see that they've donated $90 million for public education. So I suppose if you're new to my channel, you may say, well, Patrick, what's the problem with that? What's the big deal? If you've not seen my Weatherman series, I highly suggest you check out the Weatherman 1 and 2. They are both on my page, and I think many of you have probably seen it, but if you've not, this will explain how a lot of this works. So many of these nonprofit organizations donating to public education, but much of this money doesn't ever get to the actual source. So what they use is the guise of whether it's climate change or whatever the action item is of the day, and they raise all this money. They give all this money. This is $90 million donated for public education. Well, how much went to these schools? We don't really know, right? But again, as you can see in the graphic right here, $10 million for equal pay. What did you just give $10 million to the people who weren't making the same amount of money? What is that? What does that even mean? Net zero emissions. So you see what's going on, right? Another bunch of humanitarians. Now here is another screenshot from his presentation. 4.5 million volunteer hours. But this is the key one, $310 million in grants. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a ton of coin. And of course, the number next to it too, 1% product, 45,000 nonprofit farmers. Okay, so I don't want to imply at all that all nonprofits are nefarious, because I don't believe that to be the truth. And there's probably a lot of great ones involved in Salesforce and Dreamforce. But what we've seen over the years is that much of our slush fundery gets processed through a lot of these human rights organizations, these climate initiatives, these educational bills or whatnot. We're constantly seeing boxes and boxes of documents being showing that we have all these different organizations that are donating to groups like this and working through groups like this. And this group happens to be harvesting tons and tons of data. It seems like everybody wants to get in on the Salesforce. Now, here's some people that are actually involved in Dreamforce. President Barack Obama, Tim Cook, Megan Rapinoe, who's a hero for some reason. I don't know why. You see the idea, right? Ariana Huffington, just a bunch of humanitarians over there at Dreamforce. Well, Salesforce is not just a bunch of humanitarians. They're also a bunch of colossal hypocrites. This is from CNBC from March of 2019. 50 women sue Salesforce, claiming it helped Backpage in sex trafficking. 50 women are suing Salesforce, alleging the company profited by helping Backpage to engage in sex trafficking. The women, referred to only as anonymous Jane Does, identify themselves as survivors of sex trafficking, rape, and abuse, facilitated through Backpage. The lawsuit, filed Monday in Superior Court in San Francisco, paints a dark picture of Salesforce, which has long touted human rights and building technology for the greater good. CEO Mark Benioff has advocated for gender equality in the workplace. Yeah, I just pointed out he donated $10 million to that, I guess. Shares of Salesforce fell nearly 4% Wednesday. The lawsuit claims in public, including on Twitter, Salesforce boasted about fighting human trafficking using its data tools. But behind closed doors, Salesforce's data tools were actually providing the backbone of Backpage's exponential growth. Yeah, I showed you those numbers. They were astounding. Salesforce didn't just provide Backpage with a customer-ready version of its data and marketing tools. Salesforce designed and implemented a heavily customized enterprise database tailored for Backpage's operations both locally and internationally. With Salesforce's guidance, Backpage was able to use Salesforce's tools to market to new users, that is, pimps, johns, and traffickers on 3 continents. Okay, well, if you're not familiar with the Backpage story, this was a site that was shut down a couple of years ago, and there were tons of different ads that were leading to human trafficking on this, and this was eventually shut down. And this was really a big achievement through the DOJ under Donald Trump. It was actually, in my opinion, one of his first really big achievements. But here we go again. Salesforce linked to some creepy stuff, including Backpage. Doesn't sound like human rights to me. Okay, so if at this point in the video you are not picking up what I'm putting down, I'm going to attempt to kick it to you straight like this. Here you have this massive conglomeration, that which is Salesforce, which is really made up of numerous businesses, right? 150,000 plus businesses. Some of them small and probably benefiting genuinely from Salesforce. Some of them incredibly massive and influential, and they are likely needing a place to put the cash. But they're making a lot of cash because they're donating a lot of cash, which to me suggests movement of money. You picking up what I'm putting down now? And this involves very influential people, right? Including a former president of the United States. So I think you're starting to see what I'm talking about here, right? Now, $90 million donated to public education, and what have we seen to show for it? Common Core, No Child Left Behind, lower test scores, kids that don't know what bathroom to use. You get the idea. Healthy Holly books from Mayor Pugh. What we see is we see a lot of these local school boards, and we see a lot of these feeder schools and Montessori schools getting tons and tons of cash for their little initiatives and their book deals. And that's where a lot of that cash goes. And the kids pay the price. Now, they also donate a lot of money to climate change initiatives. And essentially this does the same thing, right? They parade their people around. They get a bunch of people to donate to their companies. And these green and tech companies are the same kind of idea. And then, of course, you have all the money that was spent into this gender equality. And what did that get us? 50 lawsuits claiming not only sexual abuse, but human trafficking. All that data in the hands of human traffickers. Now, I don't want to get into the politics of this too much, but I did find this curious. This was from December of last year, and this was just a tweet from Business Insider. They were talking about the new CEO, Mark Benioff, who at the time was suggesting Larry Page and Sergey Brin should run for president in 2020. And of course, they are the co-founders of Google, and Google, like Salesforce, is another massive data collection center, right? This is from Salesforce.com. You can scroll down to the bottom, click on Dreamforce, and you will be able to find this keynote speech from Keith Block. This is one of his last speeches here. And I showed you a few screenshots from that earlier. And it's just essentially one of those, really annoying corporate hype shows, like,
hey guys, you ready to sell some time shares? Are you pumped? Huh?
You get the idea, right? So they brought this guy up, and I don't want to clown Homeboy, but I'm going to kind of clown Homeboy. This guy was a veteran, so I definitely don't want to clown him about that, but I found the logo very curious on his t-shirt. But even more curious, I found the reference of being covered in gold, like that jacket. He looking straight out a Soul Train with that jacket right there, and I don't think that was any sort of coincidence, but I will let you watch the video. I just wanted you to know it's from Salesforce.com. Scroll down to the bottom, click on Dreamforce, and you can watch this. There's a lot of eerie implications that are in this speech talking about Dreamforce. And I was at I'm about halfway in. They were actually bringing up a lady from the UN Women's Commission. So you go, girl. You go, girl. Well, Salesforce, like many businesses right now, took a massive plunge in the stock market. Here is a headline from IT News from last week. Salesforce makes its Sydney conference an online-only affair amidst, and I can't say that word anymore. I don't even know if I can say that word. How sad is that? We're going to just call that Corolla Tyrus. Corolla Tyrus. I know it's not great. Corolla Tyrus. So the fear of Corolla Tyrus kept Salesforce from doing not only its Sydney conference, but probably a lot of other ones. And I would argue that it looks like, at least in my opinion, for Salesforce, these conferences are really big because they invite a lot of, they get these massive hotels. Businesses come and catering, there's all this kind of stuff, and that's kind of their big recruiting gig. That's probably why they have over 150,000 businesses. But either way, they, like many, are taking a plunge, and of course that's pretty normal. But what's not normal is that it seems like Corolla Tyrus has got everybody really freaked out. Now, we've seen this before, and I don't want to talk a ton about the specifics of Corolla Tyrus, but we're seeing it being announced everywhere. And of course, it seems, at least in my opinion, to serve a couple of purposes. It really has plunged the market, and plunging the market really doesn't help anyone. What it really seems to do is hurt President Donald Trump. And of course, that's exactly what most of the Trump haters are doing right now, are ringing the bells and banging the drums about Corolla Tyrus. Seems like they're the ones doing the most fear-mongering. And yet when we saw President Trump, Mike Pence, they didn't seem very concerned. And of course, the media uses that as further fuel to attack them. So President Trump's over here just saying, maybe wash your hands. I don't know. He doesn't seem very concerned. Why would that be? Now, they're attacking President Trump, saying that he's unprepared for this, considering that he had cut some funding. And of course, now Elizabeth Dancing with Wolves Warren wants to take some of that funding for the wall and put it back into Corolla Tyrus. So I think you see where this is going. It seems like a money grab here, in addition to trying to disparage Trump. But Johns Hopkins University and a lot of other places are saying that the U.S. is number one in preparedness. So which is it? And did we know about this all along? Now, there's been a lot of talk about Corolla Tyrus, and like I said, I don't want to get into specifics, but I just want to talk about the global climate here. If you did not see this video from the 25th entitled Into the Deep, I talked about another event that was going on eerily similar. Same time, we had Elon Musk and his SpaceX rockets shooting up a bunch of satellites, right? A bunch of these satellites. And these satellites are called Starlink. Completely different name. Starlink. Sorry, I didn't mean to say Skynet. I meant to say Starlink. Anyway, so what this is essentially 5G technology, and I imagine even way beyond. And I don't necessarily know if this is good or bad. I don't really want to get into that. But all I want to point out is that it's going down. A massive rollout of these satellites has been approved by the FCC, and that's what this video is all about here. So this is all going down the same time that we're getting this massive rollout of this Corolla Tyrus. Well, let me run you through a few events from last year that might suggest a connection here. First of all, I want to take you back to May of last year. You may remember the Pentagon banning the sale of Huawei ZTE phones on U.S. military bases. And of course, we know now that Huawei was full of spyware. ZTE likely the same. As a matter of fact, QAnon had posted these boxes and boxes and crates of phones that suggested they may have been seized phones. They didn't want their military personnel to have them on base, which suggests to me that they were pretty sketchy software, right? Now, let me also rememberize you of this saga of the Chinese spies and the stolen corn seeds. If you want to know more about that, I suggest watching my video entitled 42B. It's literally the numbers 42 and the letter B. And that will talk a little bit more about this story. But you had these Chinese spies that were taking this genetically modified corn back to China. Remember, genetically modified. And of course, we've had a lot of these stories. Here's another one from December of last year, not very long ago. Chinese researcher accused of trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the U.S. Okay, so I could go off on these because there's a number of them, but a lot of these Chinese nationals taking this stuff back to China, and of course they can use this stuff as data, right? It's essentially what it is, DNA. That's what you mess with in things like corn and biological material, all kinds of crazy stuff. Next thing you know, coronavirus. Now, let's also remember from about summer of last year, Wuhan province held their own military world games, which was heavily endorsed, and I mean heavily endorsed by the United Nations. And of course, these military games were showing off their 5G capabilities. So there seems to be a lot of talk about the relation of the effects of 5G and the effects of coronavirus. Now, whether or not that's actually true, I do not know. You can decide for yourself. But I will say that the timing of the events seem to coincide. Now, it wasn't just Chinese phones and Chinese tech that the Pentagon was worried about. They were also worried about these take-home DNA tests. This is an article from December of last year from UPI.com. Senior Pentagon officials warned military personnel about taking at-home DNA tests, citing potential privacy risks. In an internal memo dated December 20th, Undersecretary for Defense for Intelligence Joseph Kernan and Acting Undersecretary for Defense for Personnel and Readiness James Stewart said DNA testing companies were seeking to attract military members as customers by offering discounts and other incentives. Okay, so they were directly targeting military members, hoping to get them as customers. The memo noted that the test could expose personal and genetic information and potentially create unintended security consequences and increase risk to the joint force and mission. Okay, well, if you've been following my channel for much time at all, you know that I've been barking about this since day one. These companies like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, which are really the two big ones there. There's other ones, but those are the two big ones. These are hoarding your data. Your DNA is, of course, your ultimate form of data. And of course, if you can kind of bend and twist DNA, I suppose you could come up with all kinds of diseases and cures, right? Moreover, there is increased concern in the scientific community that outside parties are exploiting the use of genetic materials for questionable purposes. Okay, well, that sounds a lot like China, right? Outside parties exploiting the use of genetic materials for questionable purposes, including mass surveillance and the ability to track individuals without their authorization or awareness, the memo said. All right, so I think you get the idea. Now, I want to take you back to an older article from 2013. If you think I've been barking about this for a while, this guy, Charles Seif, has been barking about it since day one. 23andMe is terrifying, but not for the reasons the FDA thinks. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole article here. I want to take you down to the bottom, which really kind of summarizes this. What the search engine is to Google, the personal genome service is to 23andMe. The company is not exactly hiding its ambitions. The long game here is not to make money selling kits, although the kits are essential to get the base level data. Patrick Chung, a 23andMe board member, told Fast Company last month. Once you have the data, the company does actually become the Google of personalized healthcare. So imagine that. Google of personalized healthcare. The company has lowered the price of the kit again and again, most recently from $2.99 to a mere $99, practically making it a stocking stuffer. All the better to induce volunteers to give 23andMe the data it so desperately wants. Currently, the database contains the genetic information of some 500,000 people. A number Wojcicki reportedly wants to double by year end. Wojcicki, you say? That's right, the CEO of 23andMe, of course, is Ann Wojcicki, who used to be married to Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google. And of course, her sister is one Susan Wojcicki, who never gets any cake on this channel. She's the CEO of YouTube, and she's also on the board of directors of Salesforce. I know, and I'm actually going to take you to the previous paragraph. Sound paranoid? Consider the case of Google. One of the founders of 23andMe, Ann Wojcicki, is presently married to Sergey Brin. Keep in mind, this was 2013. They are no longer married. The founder of Google. When it first launched, Google billed itself as a faithful servant of the consumer, a company devoted only to building the best tool to help us satisfy our cravings for information on the web. And Google's search engine did just that. But as we now know, the fundamental purpose of the company wasn't to help us search, but to hoard information. Every search query entered into its computers is stored indefinitely. I'm going to stop there right quick because I think most of you who are using Google at this point know that Google stifles your searches, which is why you probably shouldn't be using Google. Google tracks your searches. There are other ones like DuckDuckGo, and you can put your preferred one down below if you'd like, but there are other ones that you can use. But the point is that's exactly what Google's doing now, and now they're really not having any problem showing you that. They're going to block out all your searches that you would like to find, and they're going to plug in theirs. And they really never cared how you felt about it. Joined with information gleaned from cookies that Google plants in our browsers, along with personally identifiable data that dribbles from our computer hardware and from our networks, and with the amazing volumes of information that we always seem willing to share with perfect strangers, even corporate ones. That data store has become Google's real asset. By parceling out that information to help advertisers target you, with or without your consent, Google makes more than $10 billion every quarter. Now, 23andMe, as well as Ancestry.com and some of these other companies, are also struggling in this economy, and for a couple reasons. They were already starting to struggle. I think, people are picking up on this and starting to understand really what they are doing, and of course that becomes less attractive. But there are also a wellspring of different companies that are like this that can offer similar services, maybe at a better price or whatnot. But either way, 23andMe and Ancestry.com are having cutbacks. This is from February 25th from Bloomberg. Consumer DNA testing firms are closing. Salesforce is the industry to move beyond the genealogy tests that turned a handful of well-funded companies into household names. Okay, well, that's pretty big. What it really means is that they're getting out of the genealogy game and trying to offer up something else, but they're still going after your data. At least 3 companies have closed down or suspended their operations over the past year, while the 2 DNA testing bellwethers, Ancestry.com LLC and 23andMe Incorporated, each cut approximately 100 jobs in recent weeks. Others have pulled tests from the markets thanks to slow sales. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this because a lot of it talks about rival businesses and stuff like that, but I do want to take you down to what Ann Wojcicki had to say about it. 23andMe CEO Wojcicki said she views the decline as temporary. The company recently posted a slew of job openings in its growing therapeutics division, a sign that it is placing increased focus on turning its trove of DNA data into new therapies. Last month, it licensed a drug it developed in-house to another company for the first time, to Spanish pharmaceutical company Almirall S.A. It also has a deal to collaborate on drug development with GlaxoSmithKline PLC, which took a $300 million stake in the company in 2018. So as you can see, these people aren't giving up on going after your data. They're just looking for another way to do it. But once again, they're focused on your health. Remember, they're the Google of health. Now allow me to take you full circle. This is an article from 2018 from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution regarding the Google of health. Can police legally obtain your DNA from 23andMe, Ancestry, The DNA you send in the mail through genetic kits and ancestry programs like 23andMe and Ancestry can be used by police in a criminal investigation, but it doesn't happen very often. Recently, Joseph James D'Angelo, the man authorities suspect is the so-called Golden State Killer, responsible for at least a dozen murders and 50 rapes in the 70s and 80s, was arrested more than 3 decades after the last killing. And according to the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, investigators used information from an online genealogical site to determine whether the DNA from one of the crime scenes was a match, the Associated Press reported. California police plan to use a similar process via a private lab to track down the identity of the infamous Zodiac killer who murdered at least 5 people and injured 2 others in the late 1960s. But both Ancestry.com, 23andMe, 2 of the largest companies that produce genetic profiles for customers who provide DNA samples, said they don't work with law enforcement unless they receive a court order. Neither companies received a court order regarding the D'Angelo case. Police have only requested information from 23andMe for 5 Americans, and according to 23andMe reports, the company didn't turn over any information. In each of these cases, 23andMe successfully resisted the request and protected our customers' data from release to law enforcement, Black and colleague Zarina Kurovac wrote in a 2016 blog post. So that brings us all back to the curious post of 3884, where we saw these strange tweets from Patton Oswalt back in 2013. And there's more like them, and I'm not going to highlight them. Is this just a case of an actor/comedian that took his blue humor a little too far, or is there some really ill behavior past that? Well, I don't know for sure, but what we do know is that Q highlighted these tweets in particular and was talking about a big name coming. And a year later, we get some big names stepping down, and the only immediate relevance that I saw was Bob Iger working with Disney, and of course Patton Oswalt also working with Disney, but it just didn't seem like a concrete enough connection, at least to me. But let's also remember it was Patton Oswalt's now deceased wife, Michelle McNamara, who was largely credited with being the one to lead to the arrest of our Golden State Killer, Mr. D'Angelo. And that seems to be in contention. Now, let me show you this tweet from April 26, 2018. This was a Twitter user that was talking to Patton Oswalt, who says, just a coincidence that they caught the guy 32 years after his last attack, but a few months after publication of McNamara's book. Got it. Patton agrees. Well, let's remember, Patton helped finish this book. McNamara died before finishing the book. And yes, it was 32 years after his last attack. So that's a long time after this attack to be able to find this killer. And then, of course, just months after this book is released, they were able to find this killer. And let's also remember that McNamara died in April of 2016. Now, she technically died on the 21st. Oddly enough, the USA Today reported it on April 23rd, or as April 23rd. So we see 23 and 32 in this tweet. And of course, we were just talking about 23andMe. Well, 2332, these are some cabal numbers that we've seen over the years. Skull and Bones being the 322 is a popular number for them. And of course, we've seen in tons of Q posts and a number of tweets the symbolism behind the number 23. So is that all just a coincidence? Could very well be, but here's the most curious thing about all of this to me. Here we have this person who is going after the Golden State Killer, who was found dead before finishing her book. Her husband finishes the book, and then just months after, they credit a lot of this, they find the killer. However, I just read to you an article suggesting that law enforcement was saying it was one of those at-home DNA testing sites that helped them locate the killer. And yet, 23andMe said that all 5 times police have approached them, they have turned it down. Now, if I didn't know anything about 23andMe, I would, of course, applaud their decision. That's a whole different ethical conversation we could get into, and I don't really plan to do that now. But I would say that that's a whole different ball of wax there, right? Without a court order, I would say that there's a lot of ethics that could be violated there, but we're really getting into some suspect territory. But my point is that 23andMe said, hey, we didn't give you any information, and yet the law enforcement was saying that was the reason why they were able to do that in the first place. So, was Patton Oswalt right? Was McNamara's work really what led to this, and they wanted to give somebody else credit, so they end up giving these data hoarding companies this credit? Meanwhile, McNamara is found by accidental suicide. Patton Oswalt finishes the book, all of a sudden does this an HBO documentary. It all seems a little suspect, doesn't it? So there you have it. Is this post 3884 a little bit more significant than we may suspect? You can decide, but I will leave you with a couple of fun facts, and I call them fun facts because I'm not really sure how relevant they are, but I do find them interesting and I thought that you might enjoy. So 23andMe has obviously gotten a lot of investment over the years, but one in particular was this Sequoia Capital, and I think it's pretty significant because it's about $200 million worth. That's pretty significant right there. They're buying up quite a bit of stuff, not just 23andMe, but in particular, they are going after a lot of social media content, and of course, they provide evergreen funds. I believe Sequoias have evergreen leaves. We talked a lot about evergreen, haven't we? And they are, oddly enough, like I said, buying a bunch of social media content alongside another group called Evergreen Partners. Probably completely coincidental, right? Well, all of this, of course, leads to a very, very dystopian idea of these social media content providers and these, whether it's Facebook or YouTube, Jisky and Google, all of this dystopian social media content got me to thinking about this movie, The Circle, from 2017, starring Emma Watson and Tom Hanks. And of course, many of you are plenty suspicious with Tom Hanks. We're not going to go into him today very much, but this movie I thought was very, very relevant in regards to what we were talking about today. Now, Q had said something big is going to happen, or someone big, right? And a lot of people have, of course, thought that that big reference might be to Tom Hanks, considering he starred in the movie Big. Now, like I said, I don't want to go too deep into him, but he did volunteer himself for a DNA test himself. If you'll remember, he was recently playing Mr. Rogers, and this DNA test allegedly shows that he's related to Mr. Rogers. There he is with his red sweater. But anyway, he went through Ancestry.com, not 23andMe, but I still found it very curious. But the movie that I thought was really relevant, of course, was the movie The Circle. If you've not seen this, it's about a social media company, and I won't give it away. But I would like to mention there was another co-star in that film. You know what his name was? Patton Oswalt. I know! And final thing for you, fun fact, add up the numbers in post 3884 and what do you get? I know. As always, if you like this video, please click like, share, and subscribe. Thanks to all of you who do that already. If you're on YouTube, please check out my alternate links down below in the video description. They will all be linked down below, as well as links to the show notes. All that stuff's down below. My email's down below if you want to email me. And of course, if you want to support the channel, my Patreon is linked down below. It's all in the video description. This is Sir Patrick Mack, and until next time, stay funky!